Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. Yesterday we took a look at what does argument look like when you're not following that 5-paragraph specific structure. Today we're going to start looking at what do those authors do when they start making an argument. So we're going to try to identify what are some of the strategies they use, try to put names to it, and then going forward we'll try to do some of that writing ourselves. So that's our goal today, to identify what some of those strategies are that an author uses when they're writing an argument. And we identified yesterday, and we did it in our writing, like these things exist in any argument. You're identifying your argument, you have reasons to go with it, you address the opposition. But once an author does that, they have to do something else to make their argument stand out, to make their piece of writing stand out. So we're going to read this again, and this time we're going to kind of put on a writer's lens to look at what is the writer doing in order to make their stuff stand out. So I'm going to revisit just some portions from yesterday's reading called Passing on Wealth. And as I read this, see what comes to mind for you. I'll show you what I'm doing for the first couple, but before I even give you mine, see what you're seeing in this. So this is the opening for it. The Wall Street Journal isn't usually a place for sports news, so I was surprised to find a picture of pitcher Tom Glavine on the front page the other day. Intrigued, I read the story, which proved to be about Glavine's plans for his death and his money, or better put, where does his dough go after he does? Glavine, who earns $8 million a year throwing a baseball for Atlanta, was concerned about leaving his sizable fortune to his children. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth, he told the Journal, implying that anything his mouth wasn't good enough for, his children's weren't either. So we're already noticing some things the author is doing here. I'll give you guys a minute to see what you're coming up with, and I'll share my list. So I see the argument here, like I could say what this article is going to be about. I'm not sure which side this author is on yet. They haven't given me their reason. So one of those things is placement of thesis. Like when we're writing our 5-paragraph structured argument, we put our thesis at the end of the first paragraph, at the end of the intro. It's not the same when you're writing a piece in the real world. Sometimes people will put it there, but sometimes they don't. This one, it looks like the argument is about the idea of where does his dough after he does? So what is Tom Glavine going to do with his money after he passes away? Plans for his death and his money. So we're not quite sure what the author thinks about it yet, but the author has started bringing that up a little bit. Punctuation is a big one. Like I can see this author is using dashes, using question marks. So it's not just thinking about just using one form of punctuation. Something that we did earlier when we were doing narrative writing is sentence length. Like that's definitely going to come in here. Like when we're thinking about what does real life argument writing look like, it has a lot of pieces of narrative in there. So we'll bring some of those back up. One thing that you're told not to do when you're writing an argument for a test or school is to not put yourself in that argument. We see that this author does do that. So sometimes there are benefits to that, sometimes there are not. So that's a decision that you make as an author. There's not just one hard and fast rule about it. He uses quotes, and his quotes are kind of similar to how we were using quotes, something to support what he's saying. He wants to use actual words from Tom Glavine, who is the person that he's talking about, so he takes a quote directly from Tom Glavine. And then also uses some numbers and stats, $8 million a year throwing a baseball, so we get a little bit of context there. And if I just had to say what is the author doing in all of this, it's kind of similar to what we did in ours. He's kind of hooking in the reader, building some context for what's going on. So after I read these first 2 paragraphs, I have a pretty good sense of like what's going to come in this argument. I'm going to hear some arguments about what Tom Glavine's doing with his money and how this author feels about it, and probably a little bit trying to convince me how I should feel about it. So I'll take a look at one more section. Glavine's solution was an interesting one. He told the Journal he didn't want his kids thinking life was a breeze. Didn't want them, in essence, going to his funeral, then running to the bank yelling payday. To that end, he's creating a family incentive trust that, in the case of his untimely death, would distribute his money to his children only under certain conditions. In a nutshell, they would have to behave as he saw fit. No obedience, no inheritance. So again, take a look. What kind of things are standing out to you in this part? And again, if I'm just looking at it through a writer's perspective, he definitely varies the sentence length here. So to start off his paragraph, we don't have, I guess it can kind of function as a topic sentence. Glavine's solution is an interesting one, and then he describes Glavine's solution there. But then we also have like differences in sentence length. Again, something that we were doing when we were writing narrative. No obedience, no inheritance. Like that is definitely a short sentence there. And then also the spacing, like paragraph length, spacing of paragraphs. Like both of these, this first one is 1, 2, 3 sentences. This second one is 2 sentences, and this last one is 1 sentence. So that idea of a really structured paragraph doesn't really exist in real world argument writing. You're going to kind of break up things where you see fit. So the reason we did our form of writing first is I want us all to have those structures, know those pieces that go in there, so that when we're thinking about what it actually looks like, we know we still have those same pieces, but we're making decisions as the author as how they should go. So I've just thrown a bunch of different strategies that this author is doing at you guys. For today's assignment, you're going to go through the article and you're going to name as many as you can. See what other things you're noticing about what this author is doing. Some of it can be structure stuff, grammar, sentence, a paragraph, how that's looking, and then also like what are the things in the paragraphs that he's doing. So see how many things you can name, and then eventually we'll take that and use that to do our own writing.